Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the Reliability Demand Response Resource Bidding Enhancements for Track 2 Draft Final Proposal. My name is Brenda Corona, here with the ISO for Stakeholders Affairs Group. I am kindly joined here with Anya Gilbert from the Policy Development Team, as well as Bill Weaver, Greg Ford, and Joe Powers. We are here to help drive this presentation, and we will be providing this next agenda where Anya will be giving us each of these topics for the draft final proposal, and then I do have few mini reminders for this particular meeting that all this information is located under the Stakeholders Initiatives page. This meeting and reminder of this recording will be posted publicly as well, so any recording and related transcription should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. And these calls are structured to stimulate any dialogue and engage different perspectives, so please keep comments brief, professional, and respectful. We will be making sure we pause for any questions after each agenda item. Please feel free to raise your virtual raise hand icon above the chat window, and that way we could call on you and unmute you. But also, if you're joined in audio, please press #2 on your device. If you do experience any technical issues, please feel free to message us during the chat, and we will be able to help you. But please remember also to state your name and affiliation before you state your comment, and we will be able to assist you. And then one last reminder for today is that we have sent out a notice for the Stakeholder Symposium that is scheduled on November 9th and 10th. So please feel free to visit that in notice. And if you have any questions, feel free to visit us at isostakeholders.com, at ISO.com. Okay, so in the next slide, we have the initiative process, stakeholder process. Right now, we're currently on this step during the proposal development, and the next step we're looking forward to is the final proposal. Feel free to ask any questions and visit our site for those steps and materials. I'll go ahead and pass it to Anya, and please give Anya a presentation. Right.
All right. Thanks so much, Brenda and Michelle, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining this afternoon's discussion on RDR Bidding Enhancements Track 2. I did want to flag, as we get started, Track 2 does include 2 enhancements, looking at one, solving the infeasible dispatch issue by implementing a P-min re-rate functionality in order to accurately reflect RDR in real time. And second, we'll be discussing increasing the discrete RDR cap from 50 megawatts to 100 megawatts, as well as allowing for exceptions. So let's get into the first enhancement. This slide is really intended to present a state of the world today in which RDRs can be dispatched either continuously or non-continuously in real time. I know we've touched on this before, but I'm including this slide for anyone joining these discussions midway through our processes. So currently, RDR can be moved up and down between their bid and a P-min of 0, which from a utility program perspective can look like the program's turning off, whereas from CAISO's perspective, this is a feasible market outcome. This wasn't as big of an issue prior to summer enhancements, where RDR was primarily exceptionally dispatched. But when we move RDR to being dispatched by the market more often, this is anticipated to occur more frequently, and to respond to stakeholder concerns, we're looking to address this issue. So both on the left-hand side and right-hand side, you're looking at 2 solutions that from the market perspective are feasible. The scenarios both look at a 15-minute dispatchable RDRR with a Pmax of 10, a Pmin of 0, a shaped bid curve, which is what you see in the gray bars of the bids that were submitted to the CAISO. The orange bars, which are all at 0 for the sake of this example, represent the committed day-ahead quantity, and the blue bars show the real-time dispatch quantity, where on the left you're seeing continuous dispatch from hour ending 17 to 21, whereas the table on the right, the graph on the right shows a non-continuous dispatch from hour ending 16 through hour ending 20. So to continue this background, CAISO first sought to fix the issue of real-time and feasible RDR dispatch by examining if there are minimum load costs that could reflect RDR's actual costs to reach that minimum load. However, looking more closely at the RDR settlement agreement and the intent of the settlement agreement, that RDR was designed as an emergency response resource, and the documentation around RDR not being price responsive, but being economically dispatched when triggered, and also looking at the underlying retail tariffs that participate as RDR are in the market, we're observing that those retail tariffs do not incorporate the concept of minimum load, only a single load level that must be reached. And I'll note that we did receive some comments, and thank you to stakeholders that submitted comments on the second revised proposal. We received comments from the council supporting our position to not include minimum load costs, but we did receive comments from SCE, DMM, and CLICA, all advocating for including those minimum load costs. I recognize that DMM did recommend that if scheduling coordinators were able to attempt better alignment of their RDR bids with their actual costs, and if CAISO developed a framework to accept those bids, it could support a more efficient market outcome. We agree in principle. However, this suggestion would redesign RDRR and move away from the intent of the existing settlement agreement of RDR as an emergency response resource. And if CAISO were to redesign RDR as a cost-based resource, it's likely that RDRR, the model, would overlap with the proxy demand resource model. So at this time, without cost-based bids or a minimum operating level, the CAISO doesn't plan to pursue representing minimum load costs. So let me get into the enhancement. CAISO does continue to propose to fix the infeasible dispatch issue in the optimization for discrete RDRs, and I'll emphasize that this is focused on discrete RDRs. By setting the P-min of a RDRR resource to a value that's just below the upper economic limit for that RDRR using our existing P-min re-rate functionality. We'll also add the value of the product of the bid and the economic limit to the existing minimum load cost to stand in as a minimum load cost in order for the market to commit a discrete RDRR so the RDR is activated like a generator with a non-zero P-min. That P-min re-rate and minimum load cost will then be submitted for pre-fall qualification for bid cost recovery. And I'll emphasize that this only pertains to 5-minute and 15-minute RDRR when it comes to being eligible for that ECR. I'll also note that this will change the range that discrete RDR can set the price. So instead of setting the price between a P-min of 0 and their upper economic limit, they will only be able to set the price between their re-rated P-min and P-max. And the intent here is really to best reflect RDR's operational capabilities to the market. I'll note we do have an initiative to look at price formation more holistically in mid-2022. So to look at the same kind of example setup as before, but now looking at this in the context of the enhancement, if we still have a resource in this case, with a P-max of 10, a P-min of 0, that has 1 startup per day, has a minimum runtime of an hour, and a max daily runtime of 5 hours. The P-min after the close of the day-ahead market would be set below their upper economic limit. So here, if we look at the table and the gray bars are shaped, and this represents the available quantity or the bids that the RDR resource has submitted to CAISO. The orange bars, or the committed day-ahead quantity represented in the table, is set as 0, and this really represents that it did not receive a day-ahead award. The P-min re-rate indicates what the P-min was re-rated to underneath the upper economic limit. So you'll notice it's just below the available quantity line. And so when you look at those two and look at what's happening from hour ending 18 to 21, you notice that it does move between the re-rated P-min in hour ending 18 up to the upper economic limit in hour ending 19, back down to that re-rated P-min in hour ending 20, and then back up to the upper economic limit in hour ending 21. And so this is really intended to demonstrate that in the solution, there is still movement between the upper economic limit and the P-min of a resource, but it should be immaterial from the resource operator's perspective. And if we look at one interval for hour ending 18, when the resource is dispatched at 5.9 megawatts, their minimum operating level of 5.9, and the minimum load cost would be eligible for bid cost recovery if they are short for the day. So actually, let me pause there and see if there's any questions. I'm not seeing any hands raised, but I'll give it a moment in case there's any questions in the queue.
There are currently no questions in queue.
Great. So let's move on to the RDR discrete cap increase. So let me start with some of the background on this issue, and let me frame this by saying our second enhancement is proposing to increase the discrete cap from 50 megawatts to 100 megawatts. But before I talk about that, let's get into some level setting. So RDRs today may register as either continuous or discrete, depending on their abilities. Continuous, which we also refer to as marginal or non-discrete, are able to participate either in day-ahead or real-time, and their registration as a continuous resource indicates that the resource can operate anywhere between their Pmin and Pmax based on their cleared bid quantity. There's no cap on continuous RDRR. The second method of registering RDR resources is to register as discrete, and this is a real-time only RDRR registration option, and the registration indicates to the CAISO that the resource has one big bid segment, and when it's dispatched, it will generate to its Pmax. So it's really a all or nothing resource. Today, there is a 50 megawatt cap on discrete RDRRs. So we did hear from stakeholders that have requested that CAISO increase or remove the current 50 megawatt cap, really for instances where RDRs operate together in one sublab, but due to that 50 megawatt cap are forced to be represented separately, or are larger than 50 megawatts and can't be safely split either for operational or safety reasons. So I think many of you may recall from the original issue paper, CAISO had concerns with increasing the cap, in part because there are imbalance issues that can be created based on how we treat discrete resources in the pricing versus scheduling run. In the pricing run, CAISO views these resources as continuous, whereas in the scheduling run, they're viewed as discrete. So this means that there might be cases where the market might need to dispatch a resource at 5 megawatts, and in the pricing run would pick up those 5 megawatts. However, in the scheduling run, because the resource is sized at 50 megawatts would be dispatched. And that can create imbalances that would need to be absorbed in the CAISO system through ACE or through regulation. And a second issue arises with pricing. When a discrete resource sets the prices in the pricing run, it'll generally set a higher price than the price in that final most expensive continuous resource in the scheduling run would have set. And these final continuous resources have the incentive to deviate from the ISO's dispatch. So this original challenge that we found with increasing the cap, we're also we are recognizing that there is a interaction with the PMIN re-rate functionality, and that imbalance issue is mitigated when the re-rate functionality is implemented. And that's because the PMIN re-rate really changes with the pricing run fees as available, recognizing kind of the operational abilities of those resources as all or nothing, and it eliminates the imbalance between the pricing run and scheduling run. So if we look at a 50 megawatt RDR resource without the PMIN re-rate, the pricing run would see it as continuous and available between 0 and 50 megawatts. However, the pricing run may only pick up 5 megawatts, whereas a scheduling run might dispatch that resource at 50 megawatts because that's the actual size of the resource, and that could produce a potential imbalance of 45 megawatts. However, with the PMIN re-rate functionality implemented, our first enhancement, it changes with the pricing run fees so that the pricing run fees this as a continuous resource from 49.9 to 50 megawatts, which would result in the pricing run either picking up 49.9 or 50 megawatts, and the scheduling run could dispatch 50 megawatts. If the pricing run had picked up 49.9 and the scheduling run had picked up 50, you'd see an imbalance of 0.1 megawatts. So there is an interaction here that reduces the imbalance that we had been concerned about previously. So as a result of the PMIN re-rate functionality mitigating the discrete to continuous imbalance, the CAISO is proposing to double the cap by increasing it to 100 megawatts. And this increase to the cap is conditional on the PMIN re-rate functionality being implemented. We're also proposing that if there are RDR resources in excess of 100 megawatts, they may apply for master file registration exceptions to the cap. We did receive some comments on this proposal. We received support from SE and CLECA, but also some requests for additional clarity on the criteria that we'd use for exceptions to the cap. So thank you for those comments. And so with the draft final proposal, we did want to add some clarity to that criteria. And along those lines, we are proposing that resources that are larger than 100 megawatts would submit an affidavit as part of their master file registration process that attests that the RDR is located at a single site. The RDR load cannot be safely or operationally split. The RDR doesn't have the ability to operate continuously based on the source of load providing curtailment. Really, this means, in other words, it's a discrete resource. It's really an all or nothing from its load perspective as well. And then that gets to the last point of we'd like to understand the type of load or technology that's providing load curtailment during that RDR event. And the goal with developing this criteria was to reflect the fact that the load couldn't be safely operationally split and that the load truly is discrete in nature. I'll note too that any approval of these exceptions are going to be conditional on this affidavit submitted, any supporting information that's received after being requested, and our assessment if there is a potential for detrimental market or operational impacts associated with allowing these resources to register above the 100 megawatt cap. So with that, I'd like to pause for questions if there are any on the increase to the cap for discrete RDR resources. All right, I see a question from Alan Wong with SCE. Could we unmute Alan's line?
Hey, Anya. Yeah, this is Alan Wong from SCE. I'm sorry if I missed it, but on your first bullet here, conditional on the PMIN re-rate functionality implementation, is that more kind of getting along the lines of IT sort of project list priority, or is it more of something that still needs to be investigated, whether this is a functionality that can actually be implemented? I just wanted to get the clarification on that.
Sure. So it is more of a policy perspective in terms of if we were to implement this on its own, kind of an increase to the cap, we are concerned that there could still be imbalance issues based on the way that discrete resources are viewed in the pricing versus scheduling run. And so to mitigate those issues, there is an interplay with that first enhancement. And so it's more from the policy perspective and market perspective that we'd like the P-min read rate functionality to be implemented in order for the discrete cap to be implemented. So it doesn't change the timeline. These are both set for a fall 2022 implementation timeline, and it's not that the P-min re-rate needs to be implemented prior. It's really that in order for this to be implemented and not have those adverse impacts, that we would want the P-min re-rate functionality implemented. Does that help with, at least in terms of the timing aspect and our rationale for making the increase to the cap conditional on the P-min re-rate?
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks for clarifying.
Thanks so much, Alan. Any other questions in the queue?
There are no additional questions in queue.
All right. Well, with that, I'll move on to the Western EIM governing body role. I think many of you are aware this is part of a bifurcated initiative. Track 1 is on an earlier policy timeline. But with this change, we are changing the representation of RDR in the CAISO's market. And since WEIM balancing authorities may use the RDR model as long as they have approval from their local regulatory authority and meet the requirements of RDR participation, this initiative is considered a joint WEIM authority item. We are looking for any sort of comments to the classification of this initiative. So please submit those comments if you do have feedback on the current joint authority classification. And with that, I'll turn things over to Brenda for next steps. Thank you.
Thank you, Anya. I appreciate your presentation. And I can't, oh, there it is. So for our next steps for this initiative is we are continuing to do stakeholder comments at this time. Apologies, I had to sneeze. And then we do have this set plan for the next few weeks. So for example, today, the 16th, we have our call, and then the 25th is when it's due. Next month, the goal is on the 12th is to publish the final proposal along with the draft tariff language. And then the 18th will have a meeting for the stakeholder call for both final proposal and draft tariff language. And those comments will be due on the 28th, 10 days after that. May will be the Western EIM governing body for governors on the 10th and 12th. So you could look at those details on the master calendar. And this link will direct you to the initiative page, but feel free to visit the initiative page and go to that first meeting and click on submit comment. And we look forward to everyone's comments for this draft final proposal. And then lastly, a quick reminder again, our Stakeholder Symposium is scheduled this year for November 9th and 10th. And so feel free to look into those dates, and registration will be opening up later this year. We'll give you details on that. But this time, just save the date onto your calendars for November 9th through the 10th. It will be located at the Sacramento new Convention Center at the Safe Union Convention Center at Sacramento downtown. So thanks everyone, and thanks everyone for joining our call. We'll pass it back to my event producer, Michelle, to conclude this meeting.
concludes our conference. Thank you for using event services. You may now disconnect.